Thanks everyone for tuning in. We're at the next episode of the AI Adoption Playbook. I'm here today with Michael from UserTesting. Michael, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Yeah, thanks, Robin. It's great to be here. So my name is Michael Domanic. I'm the head of AI at UserTesting. So UserTesting is a platform that gets used by companies that want to collect feedback on pretty much anything that they're doing. Traditionally, we've been a platform used by UX researchers, designers that are capturing feedback on the prototypes that they're working on, their apps, their websites. But we've grown quite a bit within the organizations that we work with. So we get used quite a lot by almost anyone in an organization that needs to collect feedback. And so an example of that could be folks from a marketing team that are building campaigns. They've got images and copy and messaging that they want to collect feedback on. So, again, we get used by large cross sections of organizations.
Yeah, I was telling Michael earlier that I was actually a customer of usertesting.com a long time ago. So
we appreciate that.
Love it. Well, actually, you guys were super helpful to our product strategy back then. So that was awesome. Great. So tell me a little bit about your role at usertesting.com. What does a head of AI actually do?
Yeah. So, I've been at UserTesting for over 6 years. Cool. So we were talking about this a little bit before the show, but my time with UserTesting actually started years before joining UserTesting. I, like you, was a customer. So during AI chatbot hype cycle 1.0, I was building a lot of AI experiences in Facebook Messenger, in Skype, in Slack. And then the backdrop to all of that was Alexa was proliferating in homes across America. Right. So I spent years building those experiences and testing them within the UserTesting platform. I have, again, been at UserTesting for over 6 years. I've had a lot of different roles in the organization. Since July 1st of last year, my official role has been head of AI. That was kind of my unofficial role for about a year before that, too.
Really cool.
So essentially what my role is focused on is leading our transformation on our AI journey.
Really cool.
Most of that is focused on our internal transformation.
Right.
So how do we use AI to augment all of our workflows, our processes, all of the things that we're doing as a company and as individuals within the company. And then I also spend some time with our product team because we have been building and launching Gen AI features since the middle of 2023.
Really cool.
I'm not the guy building those features, but I do think a lot about the rapidly changing capabilities of generative AI. I talk to our product team quite often about the art of the possible and how that might translate to the AI features that we're building in our product.
So true. I really like that you use the word transformation explicitly because I think, it's pretty clear at this point that companies are going to go through transformations. I think one of the things that's kind of interesting to me about the word transformation in the enterprise context has for so long been associated with, quote, digital transformations.
Yeah, that's true.
And I think, the digital transformation took so long to happen. And in honestly, most enterprises, it still hasn't happened, right? Like you go speak to the big banks, they're like, yeah, in theory, we have cloud infrastructure, but, it's complicated. And there's still a lot of stuff that hasn't gone through that digital transformation. And, we're like multiple decades into data as a sort of technological innovation. I'm curious why you think the AI transformation is moving so much faster than the traditional digital transformations took place?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think part of it is because AI is proliferating so fast, right? So we're seeing this rapid change in the capability level of generative AI. But I also think that AI transformation feels a lot more democratized than, from going on-prem to cloud, right? That was a challenge that was handled by a select group of people within an organization. When you're trying to integrate generative AI into workflows within an organization, everyone is involved in that process. And I just think just the nature of the fact that so many larger cross-sections of organizations are thinking about this, they're experimenting with this, it just moves a lot faster.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. And I think when I think about the sort of vectors for people to start caring about transformations, one of the things that was interesting for the digital transformation is the people that really cared about digital transformation that were exposed to the power of data early on in its life cycle were all nerds, basically, right?
Yeah.
They were people who were very technical, interplay.
Lovable nerds.
Right,
yeah.
exactly. And I think one of the things that was interesting was that for a long time, nerds would like lobby or advocate or fight with their executive teams to get executive level buy-in for digital transformations,
Yep.
right? Like, hey, there's all this cool stuff that we could do with data. And the execs would be like, what's data? I don't care, right?
Yep.
And there's a very, very different feel, I think, this time around where the CEO of basically every company is using ChatGPT, right? Or Claude or, one of the other tools. And so there is this like very tangible sense from day one of like, hey, this tool is like very personally useful to me already. Like, why isn't it useful for me at work? Like, hey, Michael, like, why haven't we transformed already? My personal life is transformed. Like, why haven't we transformed at work? And I think that dynamic where like the execs have so much exposure to the technology from day one is quite different, I think, to what we've seen before as well.
Yeah, I would agree. And like, I think every company's taking different versions of this too. Like you asked me earlier, why is this moving so fast? Yeah, I think there are ways that you could look at it and say, yes, it's moving fast.
Yeah.
But then there are a lot of companies who still are trying to figure out, what are we supposed to be doing with AI?
That's so true.
So yeah, I think there's a pretty uneven playing field right now.
Very, very
and
true.
I think what it comes down to is companies that have that are enabling the right set of individuals
Right.
to lead the rest of the workforce through this transformation are the ones that are probably making the faster progress. I talk to a lot of leaders from other companies who are like, we're just concerned about our security, data privacy. We don't want to put that in the model. We think it's going to train the model. They're saying that it hallucinates too much. So we're telling our workforce, don't use it because we're concerned. Yeah, or because we're concerned about the hallucinations. So yeah, I think it really just comes down to the profile of the organization that you're talking to.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I should caveat, like, I sat down with the head of AI at like a massive global retail and investment bank, right? Like one of the brands that everyone's heard of. And we were talking about, their Gen AI strategy. And he kind of sort of drops in the conversation that he is working on a procurement cycle to unblock Azure OpenAI at the bank. And I was like, this conversation was very recent, right? Like maybe a month ago. I was like, interesting. Okay, like Azure OpenAI, that's kind of something I thought these guys would have like at least gotten the right to experiment with already.
Sure.
And I was like, how long has that procurement cycle been going? And he was like, well, we've been doing it for 18 months, right?
Okay.
And so, as you say, it's a very uneven playing field. Some folks are moving very, very fast. Some folks still trying to figure out if they're even comfortable with it.
Yeah, I mean, I'd be curious in that use case. What's happening? Why is it taking 18 months? Is it just because things are kind of stuck in security review and they just can't get to a comfort level?
This is a very condensed version of the answer. Yes, that's exactly right. I think part of it is maybe actually less security, to be honest, and more just legal. So a lot of these, especially these big global banks, they subject to a bunch of like financial resiliency like regulation. So they can't actually do anything until they know that they have like 2 layers of redundancy if they like use that product, right? So every time they buy anything, they have to also buy like 2 backups in order to be able to like, keep providing their services if the like main thing goes down, right? And obviously with these new services, things like OpenAI, like how do you define what is a sufficient like backup for OpenAI? Because obviously, there are other foundation model providers out there, but they don't offer the exact same services. They certainly don't offer the exact same models. Like it's ambiguous because like the systems themselves are like non-deterministic. It creates an additional layer of complexity for like what is a good backup for this thing, right? And I think it's just honestly more than navigating the security story, it's just like navigating the lawyers, and those lawyers are expensive, right? So you're paying like outside counsel for a global bank for 18 months. Oh boy. That's a lot of money.
Yeah, I hear that. I mean, we kind of, I wouldn't say we deal with the same challenges, but we think about these things certainly at UserTesting. I mean, we do have an AI governance council, and that is a cross-functional group of people where it is myself, it's people from product, it's people from legal, it's people from security, it's people from our IT and technology team.
Yeah,
I think like every company should be thinking about there are multiple personas that should have a seat at that table and helping 100%. You figure out what AI is going to be in your organization.
100%. So interesting that you described it as the AI governance council rather than
Yeah.
like an AI adoption council. How do you so you separated out the governance questions from the like business use cases
That's
questions?
correct, yes.
How did you choose to do that? Like, how does the use case discovery work, and how does that intersect with the way the governance system works?
Yeah, so we also have an ambassadors group at UserTesting, and their focus, that is another cross-functional
Right.
group that's focused on what does our team's version of AI usage look like?
Yeah.
How are we augmenting our work that we're doing? Because it's going to look very different for people, in marketing versus sales.
100%.
Customer success is going to use it differently than solutions consultants, the people team, right?
Yeah.
So like everyone has their own version of this. Yeah, what we do is we find the people that are really leaning in and are being naturally experimental and naturally
cool.
curious about bringing AI into their work.
Yeah.
And then we kind of turn them loose within their teams,
Really
right?
cool.
And, we just use them as a vehicle to educate folks that are doing similar work to them.
How does that education process work today? Do you kind of host office hours, webinars?
Yeah.
Like tactically, if you're an IT leader, what are the like learnings that you guys have had about how to drive that sort of education process?
So it's all of the above.
Cool.
Yeah. So I host an office hours twice a week, and we stagger
Cool.
those hours, different days, different times to accommodate our global workforce.
Cool.
We bring our ambassadors in to help lead those office hours as well. We do regular lunch and learns.
If we can just like dial into the office hours.
Yeah,
for a
sure.
second. So when the ambassadors come in to lead, like what does leading an office hours actually tactically mean?
Well, I mean, essentially, office hours are pretty open-ended,
Cool.
right? Like we have time on a calendar. Everyone on the organization is invited to attend,
Cool.
and they bring their questions. Sometimes sometimes we'll set the expectation that
Right.
office hours for this specific instance
Right.
is going to have more of a marketing focus.
Cool. Got it.
And we will bring someone from marketing to
Right.
help lead that version of office
Makes
hours.
total
But
sense.
most of the time, it's pretty general, right? Like I want to keep it open because I also think it's valuable for people from finance to sit in and hear what folks on the marketing team are doing, right?
Yeah.
Because it sparks creativity, sparks ideas. So yeah, we do intentionally try to keep it pretty open ended.
Really, really cool. Okay, awesome. And then you said after the office hours, you said you were about to kind of.
Oh yeah, so we host pretty regular lunch and learns as
Cool.
well. Kind of the same idea. So lunch and learns will often focus on new capabilities,
Yep.
the models that we're using. That we could essentially do almost every week these
Really,
days because
it's
there's
crazy.
such rapid change in capabilities. So that's a big focus. A big focus is, again, inviting people in to lead. Maybe it's a 15, 20 minutes. Sometimes it's 30 minutes of here's how I use AI for this specific use case in my work, and just kind of talking about it, just telling people, here's what we did, here's the value that it created for me.
What are your favorite or coolest ones that you can share? Like the ones that, favorite is always a complex. I think there's two versions of this that are interesting. One is like most impressive, and the other is like most valuable, actually.
Yeah. I mean, for me, they're usually the same thing because I am hyper focused on value.
That's awesome.
So I think my favorite use cases have been, all right, so user testing, we use Enterprise ChatGPT.
Cool. Awesome.
We rolled that out. Everyone in our company has access to it.
Nice. When did you guys roll that out?
So we did a Teams version. We rolled that out roughly a year ago. So that was in March of last year.
Cool.
We built up a little intentional FOMO around kind of selecting certain people to give access. They talked about how it was transforming their work. And then other people, either on their teams or adjacent to those people were like, why don't I have access to that?
Right.
So that was pretty intentional. We did wall-to-wall access in the summer of last year. So that brings us to July, August of 2024. Cool. And since then, everyone in our organization has had access. We have also built a pretty strong culture around creating custom GPTs within really our Enterprise ChatGPT instance. Cool. So that's a big part of our strategy. We're a team of 800 people.
Nice.
To date, we've built about 600 custom GPTs.
Wow, that's awesome.
So there's a lot of overlapping use cases, a lot of just individual experimentation, but that's great. Like that's exactly what I want to see.
That's amazing.
And I would say that there are probably somewhere between 75 to 100 of those custom GPTs that are being used by either larger cross sections of teams
Yeah.
or throughout the entire organization.
Really cool, really cool. What are some of the most valuable ones, the ones that have made the biggest difference to you?
Yeah, so I think probably the ones that have made the biggest difference and are providing the most value are the ones that are being used across the company.
Yep.
So an example of that is, in Q1, every company's going through their version of goal setting.
Yep,
You're
makes
creating
sense, yeah.
OKRs, KPIs. Salesforce does V2 moms. We
Yep.
did that at user testing for a bit. We do OKRs now. That's often a pretty painful exercise in organizations
Yeah.
because everyone kind of knows what their goals are, but you're trying to fit it into a format. You're trying to map that.
Yep.
If you're doing a good job, you're trying to map that into the larger goals of the organization.
Yep.
Not everybody is great at doing that, and it takes a lot of time. So we've built a custom GPT that helps every level of our organization create their OKRs. So it's trained on the John Doerr methodology of creating OKRs, right? So those of us that have read the John Doerr book,
Love it.
We just kind of document like what is crafting a great OKR, a great set of OKRs, and what does a great OKR strategy look like in an organization?
Yeah.
So we train the GPT on that.
Nice.
Then we also train the GPT on every functional level of the organization's OKRs.
Cool.
So maybe you're a mid-level manager, maybe you're an individual contributor, but by the time that you're using that GPT is trained on, every part of the organization above you, what the goals are.
Yep.
So you can say to the GPT, this is my role.
Yep.
This is what I think I should be focused on this year.
Yep.
And the GPT will say, great, this is a good draft of a set of OKRs that map your goals to what the goals are for the rest of the organization.
Yeah, really, really interesting. And so do you have like internal data that's feeding that, or is it mostly just like sort of stuff like the John Doerr like OKR framework?
Yeah. So our internal data is the individual OKRs of every level of the organization.
Right.
So the first set of OKRs that you create are the company level OKRs.
Makes
And
sense.
the executive team creates their OKRs.
Right.
Then the senior leadership team creates their OKRs. So the GPT is trained at once that layer of the organization is done with their OKRs.
Got it.
Then we feed the GPT that data.
Got it. Okay. And so that's probably like 20 or so documents, basically.
Yeah, I mean, probably not even actually.
Cool.
So we keep every layer of the organization concise into one document, and then every function has their, so it's probably around like 15 or so documents.
Cool. Yeah. One of the things that I hear a lot from IT leaders that are trying to do what you guys have already done, which is get wall-to-wall access for a tool, right, is that it's easy to talk about like the time saving that some of these sorts of tools can create, right? Like the example that you just gave, okay, this is going to save people time, like crafting their OKRs, or maybe you might even argue it just makes the OKRs better. But what's quite difficult to do is then translate that sort of value into, okay, something concrete for my CFO to be like, okay, wall-to-wall GPT Enterprise for an 800-person company is not like a trivial expense, right? And so, the CFO is going to look at that and it's going to be like, well, what am I getting in return, right?
Yeah.
How did you guys navigate that?
Yeah, so I'm glad you asked that question. It is a big part of what we're focused on. So ROI is a really large focus of this transformation effort.
Yep.
You're right. It is not a small investment to try to transform an organization to do things differently. You're bringing in tools. You're asking people to take their time away to learn things. Yep. So there needs to be some level of return on that investment.
Yeah, absolutely.
In the early days, before we really took the plunge into deciding that we were going to go all in on this transformation, what we were looking at is the problems in the organization that we thought AI would be a really good solution for. So I think the first thing that we looked at was information fragmentation, right? Like that's something that every organization deals with.
Totally
Some deal with it more than others, but every organization deals with it.
Yeah.
I did a study internally that showed how big that problem was across our sales team. So our sales team, they're talking to our customers, they're talking to prospects. They need to be experts on our platform and experts in our solutions, right? So there's all sorts of internal documents that are fragmented in all these different places.
Yeah.
And they're spending used to spend hours of their week every week hunting for answers to questions.
100%.
It's a great use case for AI because you can train, a GPT or an agent, whatever it is that you're working with, an assistant on that internal repository of knowledge.
Yeah.
And then instead of hunting for the answers to those questions, you can ask the GPT and the GPT gives you answers immediately, right?
Yeah.
So we put a value on how big that problem was to our organization. We projected what bringing AI in could actually mean for that problem. And just in that one study, just in that one use case, that was really clear to all of the senior leaders and executives in our organization that this is something worth investing in.
Cool.
So, fast forward to, it's probably about 18 months ago. So 18 months later, we are working our way through this transformation,
Right.
making tons of progress.
Really cool.
And for all of our most meaningful efforts, most meaningful use cases, most meaningful GPTs that we're building, I try to build an ROI model for each of those.
Awesome.
So an example of that is we have a guy on our marketing team that is responsible for building our campaigns, right?
Yep.
So he's built a GPT that helps him create those campaigns with greater rigor and much faster.
Cool.
So that's interesting, right? So we know that we're saving him time.
Yep.
I don't think time savings is actually really all that interesting of a calculation.
Right.
What's more interesting is what you do with that time.
Exactly.
And so for his team, he can create more campaigns.
Right.
We know what the average value is of a campaign for user testing.
Cool.
So if we can increase that by 40, 50%, we have a real tangible value that we can attach to that effort.
That's awesome. And so do you guys go the extra mile of measuring whether the number of campaigns increased? Is that self-reported? Do you have systems to do that? How do you think about whether it's necessary to go and actually quantify, okay, we generated this time savings. We said that would lead to a 15% uplift in the number of campaigns launched. Did that materialize or not?
Yeah. So, I mean, that's a measurement that takes time,
of
right?
Course,
it takes time to look at what you're doing over, a period of 6 months or 12 months. So I would say we're in the middle of that. The short answer to your question is yes, absolutely. Really cool. That is something that we are hyper-focused on.
Really cool.
Are we delivering against the expectations that were set by bringing an AI solution into this problem?
Yeah, super, super interesting. I was speaking, actually, the previous episode of the podcast was with David from MongoDB, and we were talking about this exact thing. And one of the things he said that I thought was very interesting was they've sort of decentralized now the budget and the spend for these AI tools to the department heads.
Yeah.
And so they're kind of saying to the department heads, sure, you can spend $1 million on this tool, no problem. But you have to kind of sign up for an extra $3 million of quota if you're the sales team, right?
Yeah, sure.
Or you have to sign up for $1 million of reduced, infrastructure spend if you're the DevOps team, whatever it is, right? And, they're sort of they're decentralizing the sort of ROI decision-making, to the budget holders and the department heads. I'm curious, have you guys tried to do any of that? Have you intentionally decided not to do that? How are you thinking about that?
Yeah, so most of our budget is more centralized around our AI efforts right now. So the way that we think about this mostly is through general purpose tools, right? So I mentioned our main general purpose tool that we use is OpenAI Enterprise ChatGPT.
Right.
We also use Gemini. We have general purpose educational tools that we've rolled out in the organization as well. We use a tool called Section to help educate everyone on how to bring AI into knowledge work.
Yep.
Because, I can't be everywhere at once. Our ambassadors can't be everywhere at once. So we need some, outside help with that. So most of that comes from a central AI transformation budget.
Got it.
That being said, everyone in the organization is using software tools that are now rolling out AI features.
Every single SaaS tool.
Yeah. So there's point solutions now that people are using, and
what are the point solutions that you found most useful
that are rolling out AI features?
Yeah.
I don't know. That's a tough question to answer because I'm not in it every single day, right? That's a better question for the people using the tools.
Makes sense. Yeah.
And maybe I should wrap my arms around that a little bit better. But there's this pejorative term that's been used where a lot of these point solutions are just creating AI wrappers, right? And I think that is the case for a lot of them. But what we're seeing is that these point solutions are coming to us and saying that we're rolling out these AI features and they're either giving it to us for free. We know that we're going to pay for it at some point, right?
Right.
So it's like an extended trial.
Right.
Or they're saying we're going to roll out this AI feature and it's going to cost you, X dollars per person per month. And then that's when we have getting more serious conversations around what value is this going to bring to us?
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I mean, you mentioned Gemini. Google have very much taken the approach of like, we're just going to give everyone Gemini.
Right.
And
We're a Google shop, so we have access to Gemini now.
Right.
Yes.
And so obviously, eventually that will show up in the renewal bill at some point.
Yes.
We're all waiting.
We're expecting that. Yes.
I think like one of the things that's very interesting to me about all of this is like very early on in the AI wave, I think the narrative was very much like, oh, the incumbents are going to just completely dominate here because it's so easy to add an AI feature.
Mhm.
I remember like for my sins, I like used to listen to the All In podcast, and the guys there were talking about like Adobe's like offering and how like you could do some like Photoshop thing and it would use AI to like edit the images and it was all perfect and like, wow, isn't Adobe just going to like be the only winner in the like AI image editing market? And of course, like that was not just wrong, but it was just completely backwards, where in fact very, very few of these point solutions have as yet like really, really taken off.
I agree.
And the platform approaches, like obviously OpenAI and such, have done extremely well where, nobody had heard of these companies 3 years ago, 4 years ago, but all of a sudden there's a lot of tremendously successful companies like Cursor and Windsurf that, hundreds of millions of people are using today. And the products were just built from the ground up from AI. I'm curious if you have thoughts or perspectives on why it's the case that the products that have so much of the mind share tend to be like very new products and products that are like not necessarily like really old incumbents with their AI feature.
So I think this just comes to the innovator's dilemma, right?
Right.
So if you're the incumbent, you're thinking about bringing AI in to augment some small piece of what your solution is,
100%.
right? Like you're not looking to disrupt your current business offer.
Right.
So, I have this conversation quite often with our product team, and I'm always trying to encourage us to think about if we were a startup today and user testing didn't exist, how would we build that solution to the problem
Really cool.
that we are a solution to for our customers, right?
Yeah.
How would we use AI to do that?
Right.
And that's, I think that's the right frame of mind for product leaders to be in when they're thinking about building AI solutions, bringing it into their stack.
Yeah.
I don't think a lot of companies are doing that quite yet, right? I think that's probably why you're seeing a lot of companies they're building AI solutions into their product, and then they're coming to us and saying like, oh, it's going to be free for a little while because they don't really quite know, like, is this going to actually be valuable?
Right.
New entrants are just able to be a lot more creative. They're not burdened by trying to maintain their legacy solution while also like cramming AI into it. Right? So I think that's probably why.
That makes a ton of sense. Yeah. Okay. So moving on a little bit from like the sort of initial process of like, how do you get this stuff into people's hands? 'Cause it sounds like you guys are like, way ahead of that curve there. Actually, I'm curious, like, do you guys track and measure like how many people are using AI tools like weekly? Nicely.
Yeah. So I monitor that very closely.
Cool.
So I mentioned earlier in our conversation that we went wall to wall in like August of last year.
Nice.
So we're 7-8 months into our full enterprise journey.
Yeah.
We're at about 75% weekly active users in our enterprise ChatGPT instance. They just rolled out on their platform a customer-facing dashboard. So I used to get these like weekly spreadsheets that I had to put through a custom GPT to reformat the data and like give it to me in the way that I needed it.
Right.
But they just rolled out a customer-facing dashboards, and that was our first look at daily active users, which wasn't really on my radar. Like I didn't really think too much about it, but I was pretty amazed to see that we're actually about 50 to 60% daily active users.
Really cool.
I don't know quite what that means yet, right? Like I have to like think about that a bit, but we have some pretty aggressive goals to get everybody using AI in meaningful ways that augment their work.
Yeah.
And I think where every company is at in their journey right now is just start experimenting. Like use it as often as you can. Put that sticky note on your monitor that says use AI.
Yeah.
And I think that like we talked earlier about tracking the value. I think that's important too, but it's also important for you to just tell your workforce, like, just experiment, right? Experiment and come to us when you find something that's interesting, and we'll tell the rest of the organization. We'll elevate that use case. So that's kind of a long answer to your question. The
That's a
short
great
answer to
answer.
your question is we do meticulously track our usage of our AI tools.
So I think that's awesome, and I think that's the exact right like strategy like to do if you want to like learn how the technology works and learn what the use cases are. Obviously, in practice, you typically also want to have some level of guardrails and controls around like what that kind of experimentation is, right? And
Yeah.
what's safe. How do you guys think about that? Right? You're giving everyone access and you're saying like, go figure it out. Like, how do you make sure that you're comfortable with
Yeah.
the type of stuff?
It's a great question. And this is something we think about all the time as an organization. So earlier I talked about our AI Governance Council.
Yeah.
So one of the first things that our AI Governance Council did
Yeah.
was create a set of AI usage guidelines
Nice.
that gets published across the
Cool.
organization. So it's a pretty simple guide and
Nice.
identifies classes of data and whether or you can or cannot use that type of data in an AI environment.
Awesome.
So for us, there is a pretty large class of data that is an absolute no-go for us, and that is our customer data.
Totally.
So our customers are coming to our platform.
Right.
They have important questions about maybe things that they're designing.
Yep.
They launch a test in our platform to capture that insight.
Right.
They own all of that data.
Right.
Almost no one in our organization would even have access to it.
Right.
But even for those few that would potentially have access to
Yep.
it, like some of our customer-facing teams,
Yep.
they know, and I talk to them about this all of the time,
Right.
that you cannot use that data in any kind of AI environment.
Right.
And we do have generative AI features that synthesize that same data within our platform,
Right.
but that's all opt-in by our customers, right?
Right.
That's
right.
they're invoking that.
Different.
None of it gets automatically sent through an LLM, like they're invoking it, they're opting in. And in our internal use cases, everyone in our organization knows that you can't touch that data. So then there's other kind of more obvious ones like PII, like don't put your credit card in, stuff like that.
Right.
But we do operate in an enterprise environment, which means that our data is walled off from training the model. That is the default state to an enterprise LLM. And that is what I would recommend for any organization that really wants to take AI transformation seriously
100%.
Is make sure you're in that enterprise environment. Make sure that the default state is that your data is not training the model.
Yeah, 100%. And it honestly, I think it's a big part of the reason that GPT Enterprise has the level of appeal that it does is because everyone knows that your people are using ChatGPT anyway, right?
Yeah.
So having the ability to know that that's being done in a way that isn't training the model is actually like a pretty strong value proposition, I think.
Yeah, I think like it alarms me how much companies are looking the other way. Like, oh, like you've used your personal account, or don't tell me about it, right?
Right.
That seems pretty problematic. I mean, maybe there's companies that just like using their data to train a model. Maybe that doesn't mean that much to them. I can't think of who that organization might be, but I'm sure maybe there's some of those. For most organizations, you should be taking that pretty seriously.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. Now, I mean, I think most of the foundation models have gotten pretty serious about this recently. Like, when the industry started, you couldn't get anyone to agree to not train off your models. And actually, so our lead investor, Spark Capital, the partner there, he was head of product at OpenAI before he joined Spark, and he was there during the ChatGPT launch. And one of the things that he was telling me was that it's pretty fascinating. So internally, they were using ChatGPT long before it was public, right?
Sure.
And feedback cycle came around, and people would use ChatGPT to synthesize or generate their self reviews or their peep reviews for the managers. And people were just doing this, and the security team were like, no, stop.
Okay.
You can't use ChatGPT to do that because that's sensitive information that will make it into the core model.
Yeah.
And that then became this huge palaver where they had to unwind a bunch of stuff. Now, obviously their security posture and their their maturity as a business as well has grown a lot since then. So I assume they have their own GPT Enterprise account now and can do this stuff without worrying about it. But yeah, I mean, if you have no guardrails and no controls in place, then it's worth knowing that even OpenAI were hesitant about that.
Yeah, that's an interesting situation for them to have been in, because part of the value in their employees using it is they get more training.
Right.
But then there's that whole class of data that no, don't use it for these use cases.
Right.
That is actually pretty interesting.
Yeah, it's a very unusual category of problems that
Sure.
probably only
Sure.
applies exactly to
Yeah.
like 5 companies or something. But yeah, pretty interesting. Okay, that makes a ton of sense. You talked a little bit about the inputs that you feel like you need to control. How do you think about outputs that you need to control? Like,
Yeah. So I think, what are you asking? Like, how much can we trust the outputs, and how much there needs to be like a human in the loop reviewing that?
yeah, I mean, I guess like, sort of that's certainly one angle on the question. Another angle on the question might be like, where are the areas where you feel like you need more eyes on the output versus like less eyes on the output? Do you have, to give a really simple example, right? Let's say you have someone who's drafting an internal note to, one of their colleagues, maybe less need for like a strict governance process around that versus a lawyer that's drafting a note for a lawsuit. Probably like, you want more controls and more sort of safety built into that process. So curious if you have a system for distinguishing what's like low risk, what's high risk from an output perspective.
Yeah, I don't know that we like specifically articulate that
Sure.
to the organization. I think broadly what we talk to the organization about is, hallucinations are a factor.
Yeah.
Inaccuracies are a factor
Yeah.
in those outputs.
Yeah.
So you need to really take seriously what the model comes back with, right?
100%.
I think what I would encourage our organization to do is take those outputs and use that as a draft, like use that
Really
as
cool.
a starting point.
Really cool.
And certainly if you're in legal and you're using it for legal use cases, you need to review that the same way that you would review anything that is going to have any kind of
100%.
legal implication, right?
100%.
So I think what we ask our organization to do is know that and then take a common sense approach to how you're using those outputs.
Really, really cool. Really, really cool. Yeah, that makes a bunch of sense. Is that part of like you mentioned earlier, like the AI Council, the Governance Council released like a sort of AI usage guide. Is that part of that usage guide?
Yeah, it is. It is part of that usage guide,
Cool.
certainly. Yeah. So in addition to identifying classes of data that we can and can't use, there's also a just general knowledge about how you should use those outputs, the level of scrutiny that you should be applying to those outputs.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And then obviously, like one of the things that I feel like is increasingly gathering pace in the industry is agents, right?
Yeah.
And the ability for agents that can sort of do things autonomously. Anthropic released the MCP standard a few months ago. That's gotten very popular. Google released their A2A standard as well quite recently. I noticed that like GitHub number of stars for that is like through the roof. There's like a bazillion stars or something on that GitHub repo, but I don't hear quite so many people talking about like actually implementing stuff. Maybe it's just too new. I'm curious, how do you think about agents at user testing? How do you think about agentic AI? What's the sort of part? What role does that play?
So I think the stage that we're at right now is there are some agentic use cases that we're deploying.
Cool.
So customer service is one of those use cases. So we do use a platform that we have built an autonomous agent to reply to
really
kind of low-level customer service questions.
Sense. Yeah. And so the word agent is so complicated.
It is,
like people use different words that use the word to mean 8 different things. When you talk about a customer service agent, right? There's a version of that where it's like responding to customers' questions. Yeah. And then there's another version of that where it's like
logging into systems and doing things. Yeah. So we haven't gotten quite to that level yet.
Okay, cool.
I think so. Low-level agents, we're working on deploying those. The more complicated, truly autonomous agents that are reaching into systems and making changes, that's stuff that we're experimenting with right now. We're thinking about where does that apply? What are, I guess like right now it's the low-hanging fruit. Like what are the low-hanging fruit of autonomous agents that, if we do deploy, they're not going to break anything.
Yep.
So I would say that I don't have like a really interesting like autonomous agent that's going to completely change our company yet, but we're thinking about this.
Really cool.
And we're on the other side, we're also experimenting with what that could mean in our product. So I use Operator pretty regularly. So OpenAI's Operator to play with our platform, right? Like I imagine myself as a customer and I use Operator to say like, I just designed this thing and I want you to go collect feedback on it and I want you to use user testing to do it.
Right.
It does it. It doesn't do a great job of it, but it's kind of still early days for that stuff.
And is that as part of the enterprise account, or do you separately have like a pro account on your?
So that has not been launched to enterprise. So that's part of my personal, the $200 a month pro tier. So we're doing a lot of experimentations with that.
Yeah, that's cool. I've used Operator really only for one thing successfully, but it was really awesome. So I used it to book a cleaner for our apartment.
Okay.
And I hate doing this kind of admin stuff. I find it like very, very stressful.
Yeah.
And my wife was like, we had a kid reasonably recently, and so like I'd sort of fallen a little bit behind on my like household duties. Maybe the household duties had climbed a lot, and so I was like, well, maybe I can just get Operator to like find us a cleaner. And the first time I asked it, it just like didn't really succeed at all. But I noticed that it has like a pre-built integration with Thumbtack. And so I was like, oh, maybe if I just like use the pre-built integration with Thumbtack, it'll work. And as soon as I clicked the Thumbtack button, boom, it like came back to me in 15 minutes with like, here are the 5 cleaners in your area. Here's what each of them costs. Here are some reviews about each of them. I picked one. She was amazing. She was absolutely phenomenal.
Yeah.
And so genuinely like made my life like quite a lot better. So that was kind of cool. Okay. So we're kind of in the wrap up stage here. So I've got 2 silly questions for you.
Okay. I like silly questions. Let's go for it.
When will AI replace your job?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I do think about this quite often. Yeah, probably, whenever we reach that AGI horizon, that's probably when it's going to replace my job.
What does AGI mean to you?
Yeah, that's an ambiguous term as well. But yeah, I think AGI is systems that are at least as intelligent as an average person that can perform those tasks that an average person might perform.
Yeah.
Obviously, we're not quite there yet. I think this is probably going to be your second question. So when is AI going to replace my job? Probably when we arrive at some kind of like AGI, ASI scenario.
Right. And so you correctly anticipated my second question, which is when will we arrive at the AGI?
That's a challenging question. I think Sam Altman and Dario Amodei are promising that we're going to get there within a couple years.
Right.
I don't know. I mean, like, will we get there? I think is another question too, right? That's another question, and I think yes. I think we will get there. When we get there is the harder one. The reason why I think we will get there is because, this is practically like all Sam Altman is talking about. Like Dario Amodei talks about it as well. You could say like, oh, that's just hype. Like they're just trying to build hype for what they're doing. But I don't think they would be talking about it as much as they do if they didn't actually believe that we were going to get there. You also have the researchers working for those frontier models that say that we're going to get there as well.
Yeah.
And then also you look at the rate of change, the rate of progress that we've seen in AI over the last 2.5 years or so.
Certainly
if you just continue to extrapolate that change out, like, we'll probably get there within a couple years.
Yeah. I think, that's definitely like a very, very compelling articulation of the case. One of the things I noticed, I think it was literally yesterday, may have been like 2 days ago, was that OpenAI deprecated GPT 4.5.
Yeah.
Right. And that came on the back of a lot of speculation for a long time that there was like, we're hitting scaling walls on, the traditional architecture for these models, right? And of course, like, maybe you can argue, well, we invented the new architecture of like the reasoning models, and that kind of gives us a bunch more scaling to do. But I'm curious if you like read anything into those tea leaves. Like, does that change your perspective on sort of the rate of change, or the like our ability to extrapolate the rate of change, maybe?
I don't know is the question. Like, I don't know what to make of that. I think that I wouldn't expect progress to be a linear line.
That makes sense.
Right?
Yeah.
I wouldn't expect things to just completely like
get better.
Yeah, one step forward. I think it's going to be, 5 steps forward, maybe 1 step back.
Right.
That's kind of what that feels like to me.
Right.
But yeah, look, it's also conceivable that we enter an era where we do kind of hit a wall.
Yeah.
And maybe that rate of progress slows down quite a bit.
Yeah.
The short answer to your question is I don't know. I don't think anyone does.
Yeah, I think that's right. Clearly there's a huge amount of uncertainty here. I think it's also just like, it's not just the intelligence of the models, right? I think maybe at this point, if you look at the adoption of AI in society more generally, And actually, Bob McGrew was telling me this like a while ago, the chief research officer of OpenAI. If you went back to 2018 and you told Dario and Sam and Greg and all the others involved, like, hey, the models in 5 years' time will be able to do all of these things, and then you just list out the things that the models can consistently do today, right? What do you think the world looks like in that scenario?
Yeah.
Those people will paint a sort of post-economic utopian scenario, right?
Yeah.
They're like, well, wow, okay, we did
point.
it. We succeeded.
Yeah.
And then you actually look around the society that we live in, it's like, okay, like, well, clearly there is a lot of enterprise value being created here, but we certainly don't live in a like post-economic utopia. Far from it, obviously. And so it seems that the sort of scaling, so to speak, may not just be in reasoning, but in all of the other sort of components of what makes the models valuable. And some of that is actually on the human side, like human user education, teaching. A lot of it is just like, actually, turns out there's a lot more to enterprise value than just like, cheap intelligence per se. I'm curious what your sort of reaction.
Yeah, well, I think maybe that's why the more interesting question here is not when will we arrive at AGI.
Right.
It's more what changes when we do.
Right.
And how are we going to live our lives differently at all?
Right.
I mean, I do think it would be a pretty radical change, but I also think it would take some time for us to turn the corner on that change.
Right. Yeah, I think it's very interesting because as far as general intelligence goes, the models are already significantly more generally intelligent than the average human. And I would certainly include myself in that, in the sense that the models know a lot more about, the history of Mongolia than I do. And they also know a lot more about quantum physics than I do. And they also know quite a lot more about 13th century British literature than I do, right? And I've actually studied pretty much all of those things, like to some degree, and I'm still much less knowledgeable about those topics than the model is, not to mention the 2 million things that I haven't studied that it does know. And I think in that sense, we're already at something that is very generally intelligent. There's certainly a phenomenal breadth and depth to the knowledge, but it's still the case that it's strangely quite stupid in little ways that can be surprising. If you ask the question in the wrong way, it can't count the number of pages in your PDF document.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And that is sort of this very strange, paradox where the model is just so brilliant in so many ways, and yet there remains these little quirky things where it just doesn't seem very, very capable.
And then maybe the framework to think about this is not AGI, but what the promise of ASI is,
right.
I mean, you could debate the differences between those two things, but I think when I hear someone like Sam Altman talk about this, what I'm thinking about is an artificial super intelligence scenario, where AI does everything incredibly well, much better than a human, and even the rate of proliferation on the capabilities of these things increases exponentially in that scenario because you have AI writing its own code, and it's doing that at maybe 1,000 times faster than what's happening today. Right. So then not only does it get better faster, but it's just exponentially increasing in what its capabilities are.
Really, really amazing.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that was amazing. I mean, just to wrap here, if you're an IT leader listening to this podcast and you want to be able to achieve the sounds like pretty phenomenal AI adoption that you guys have achieved at UserTesting, what are the key lessons that you feel like you've learned that you would want to pass on?
So you're probably not going to like the answer to this question. If you're an IT leader and you're thinking about how to really achieve rapid transformation here, I would say step aside. So I think what the reason why I say that is I think a lot of companies are stalling out on their own transformation journeys because they think about this as a technological problem to solve. I don't think it's a technological problem. I think it's a creativity problem. So the companies that are making tons of progress and driving incredible value by integrating AI, the first thing that they're doing is identifying the fact that someone in the organization needs to lead this. This is a central focus. Call it an AI czar, a head of AI, whatever it is, right? Someone needs to lead this. what I found is there are 4 dimensions to what that person should be.
Yep.
So one is an obvious one. They're fluent in AI tools,
Yep.
right? They're experimenting. They have their pulse on what's happening. The second thing is they know enough to be dangerous around the business. Like they know what the sales team is generally doing, right? They know what the marketing team is doing. They know what the people team is doing. And the third is that they are individuals that know how to get shit done.
Yep.
And then the fourth is, I think, the least obvious, most under-indexed skill, and that is creativity, right? Like these are deeply creative individuals.
Cool.
And the reason why that's important is because AI is a very abstract tool. We've talked about a lot of those abstractions.
Makes sense.
You need someone that's going to be able to translate that abstraction into something that feels real, tangible, and concrete to everyone in the organization.
Really cool.
And look, I'm not saying it's not the head of IT, it's not your chief information security officer. It's not, I'm not saying it's not those people. It's just not natively those people.
Yeah.
If they embody those 4 different dimensions, then yeah, sure, it is those people. But, you know, it just, you don't just assume that it's like, oh, it's a technology problem. Give it to our, our tech nerd to solve.
Right. Yeah, no, I love that. I think that's a really, really powerful lesson. Okay, well, thank you so much for coming on, Michael.
Yeah, thank you, Robin.
Really, really fun having you. It was a great conversation. I'm really curious to like hear more and learn more in the future about like how you guys go from like where you are today, where like pretty much everyone is using it, to where you want to be, where the agentic stuff has like really kind of taken off and you figured it out how to go from like CX world is using agents to your company is like driven by agents.
Yeah, definitely.
Gonna
I'll
be really
keep you updated. Yeah.
Amazing. Thanks very much.
Thank you.